As you sit down, turn to Genesis chapter 33, and we will close out Genesis chapter 33 and go into chapter 34 this morning. As you are turning, I want to use as our opening illustration this morning, Saul. Do you remember the story of Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 15, when Samuel comes to Saul and he tells him that God has decreed and told him to go and wipe out the Amalekites. And not just to partially wipe them out, but to wipe them out completely. He's to kill every living soul of the Amalekites, and he's to kill all of their beasts. He's to kill everything, which sounds hard for us in our day and age to hear, but we have to recognize that when God issues forth such a decree, it is not murder like it is for us. It is judgment, and it is right judgment. They were sinful. They were rebellious against God, and so it is right judgment by God. And the same happens to Israel later. We recognize that God sends Syria and Babylon to judge Israel. So we recognize, but it's hard for us to hear. But we don't have time to deal with that particular aspect of it this morning. But for this opening illustration, I want you to remember what Saul was called to. Now, what does Saul do? Saul calls about 30,000 soldiers together, and he goes and he fights a battle. But does he do everything he was supposed to do? No, he does not. He keeps the king alive, right? And he keeps some of the best oxen, sheep, and donkeys and things alive. And then later, Samuel comes up to Saul and he meets him on the road, and Saul sees Samuel and says, "Hello, blessed one." And Saul begins to tell him, "Oh, we have kept God's commandment." And Samuel tilts his head, I can see, and he, really? Well, what is that bleating of sheep I hear in the background? What is the lowing of oxen I hear? And immediately Saul begins to make excuses and to begin to say, "Oh, well, we saved a few. Yeah, we saved a few, and we're going to sacrifice them. That's why we saved them. We're going to sacrifice them to your God." You see, on down in the text in 1 Samuel 15, we come to that verse that we quote from this story, where Samuel tells Saul that it is better to obey than sacrifice. That God would rather Saul obey than he would have rather him kept the animals to sacrifice. And the reason I share that illustration this morning is because as we come to this text in Genesis chapter 33 and 34, it is a mess. Just a mess of sin. One sin on top of another sin. We have rape, we have murder, we have deceit, we have lying, we have pillaging and kidnapping, holding hostage. I mean, it is a train wreck of sin. But when we look at this text, I want you to understand that all of this colossal sin on top of another sin is on the backdrop of Jacob being disobedient. See, Jacob was supposed to go to Bethel. If you look all the way back to 28:15, when he's leaving originally to go to Laban, it says that at Bethel, God promised that God will go with Jacob, and that he will bring him back to this land. In chapter 31, verse 3, we saw that God told Jacob to return to the land of your fathers. And in chapter 35, which we will not get to this morning, but we see at the edge of the beginning verses of chapter 35, after this text we're dealing with this morning, that God tells Jacob to go to Bethel, And so we see that this is what he was supposed to be doing. But in our text, let's just read the text. In our text, he stops 20 miles short of Bethel. And starting in chapter 33, verse 18, we see this backdrop of disobedience. He stops 20 miles short in Shechem. And so all of the rest of the sin that we're about to read is on the backdrop of this disobedience. Verse 18 of chapter 33. Now Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, which he came from Padan Aram, and camped there before the city. Now recognize he's not just camping for one night, because we know in verse 19 that we're about to read that he doesn't just intend to stay for one night. Look at what happens. He bought the piece of land where he had pitched his tent from the hand of the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. Then he erected there an altar and called it El Elohe Israel, which means God is the God of Israel. And chapter 34. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. When Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he took her and lay with her by force. That means he raped her. She was not willing in this participation. Verse 3, he was deeply attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, get me this young girl for a wife. See, he's going about it a little backwards, right? He's already captured her and raped her, but now he wants to go get her for his wife. Now Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter, but his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob kept silent until they came in. Then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. Now the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved, and they were very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter. For such a thing ought not to be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage. Intermarry with us, give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. Thus you shall live with us, and the land shall be open before you. Live and trade in it, and acquire property in it. Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, if I find favor in your sight, then I will give whatever you say to me. Ask me ever so much bridal payment and gift, and I will give according to as you say to me. But give the girl to me in marriage. But Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor with deceit, because he had defiled Dinah their sister. They said to them, we cannot do this thing, to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we consent to you. If you will become like us, in that every male of you be circumcised, then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and to be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and go. Now their words seemed reasonable to Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. The young man did not delay to do the thing, because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. Now he was more respected than all the household of his father. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the man of their city, saying, these men are friendly with us. Therefore let them live in the land and trade in it. For behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters in marriage and give our daughters to them. Only on this condition will the man consent to us, to live with us, to become one people, that every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised. Will not their livestock and their property and all their animals be ours? And let us consent to them, and they will live with us. All who went out of the gate of the city listened to Hamor and to his son Shechem. And every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of the city. Now it came about on the third day, when they were in pain, that the two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came upon the city, unaware, and killed every male. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah. We just now find out in this point of the text that not only has Dinah been raped, but she's been held captive in Shechem's house. We just now find this out in verse 26. After they kill Hamor and Shechem, they take Dinah from Shechem's house and went forth. Jacob's sons come upon the slain and looted the city, because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds and their donkeys and that which was in the city and that which was in the field, and they captured and looted all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives, even all that was in their houses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me by making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and my men being few in number, they, the outsiders, will gather together against me and attack me, and I will be destroyed, I and my household. But they said, should he treat our sister as a harlot? What do you do with this? I mean, one sin on top of another sin, just colossal mounting up of sin. You could say that there is a whirlwind of sin here. One evil deed provokes another evil deed, and the cycle just continues to go on, right? Some of us are familiar with the story, Hatfield and McCoy's, right? If somebody is arguing or fighting with each other and they do so for longer than a split second, somebody might say, well, you all are like the Hatfields and McCoys. What you might not realize, because sometimes we don't know our history, what we might not realize is that is a true story. There really were and there still is today, Hatfields and McCoys. They were real people living across the river, the Big Sandy River, in the edge of West Virginia and Kentucky. And they have this history. They are part of our language because they really did kill each other. And it's silly. When you look at the story, the first known violence that is recorded that we know about is this was during the Civil War, and they were on different sides. The Hatfields that were in Kentucky were Confederates, and the McCoys that were in West Virginia served in the Union Army. And so the first known recorded killing is one of the McCoys who had served in the Union Army coming home. He got injured, and he's coming home, and the Hatfields go and find him and ultimately kill him because he served the Union side of the war and not in the Confederate side. That was the first one. The second one is over who owns or possesses a hog, a pig. They're arguing over who owns this hog, and they kill each other over who owns this hog. The next one is one of the, I can't remember which family, but one of the girls in one of the families starts liking and dating and sneaking in the woods with one of the boys from the other family. And of course, that's not going to be allowed, right? And so they literally tie. One family gets somebody, and they tie him to a pawpaw tree and kill him. And then another family goes and gets somebody from that other family that just did the killing, and they tie them to a pawpaw tree and kill them to get back for that killing. And then that family goes and gets somebody. And this goes on. And over 25 years, at least 12 people are killed in this Hatfield-McCoy struggle that we know of, that's recorded. You see, one evil deed leads to another evil deed, leads to another evil deed. And that's what we see in this text. One man, Shechem, saw a girl. He wanted the girl, took the girl, raped her. And now what's going to happen? Another evil deed to pay back that evil deed. And ultimately, Simeon and Levi kill every single male of that family. They take their wives and their children hostage and make them part of their own tribe. And they take all their possessions, and it's just one sin after another. Do you recognize, let's look at the individual sin that's going on here. Shechem, not only does he take captive Dinah and he rapes her, but he continues to not even acknowledge the sin that he has committed. He goes to Jacob with his father and says, because you recognize part of what's happened here is in that time and culture, Jacob has lost the bridal price for Dinah. Nobody's going to come and pay a bridal price, the dowry for Dinah, because now she's been raped and this has happened. And so he comes to Jacob, and it's like he's telling him, let's move on. Let's not talk about the fact that I kidnapped and raped your daughter. Let's move on beyond it, and let's just focus on, I'm willing to pay you whatever bridal price you want. There was a set price in those days, but he's going above and beyond. Whatever price you want, you name it, I'll pay it. Do you see what Shechem is trying to do? Much like we do today. He's trying to pay for his sin. He knows that he should not have taken Dinah prior to marrying her. He knows that he should not have raped her and should not be holding her captive in his house right now. He knows this, and so he's trying to overcompensate with the bridal price and say that he's going to pay whatever they want. Don't we do the exact same thing to God? We come to God and say, Lord, if you'll just overlook that, I know I messed up, but if you'll just overlook that, I'll try harder. I'll do this, I'll do that. And we try. I've even been asked before, have you made a deal with God? And what? And this mentality that is in our mindsets of making a deal with God. This is what's going through. Shechem's not trying to make a deal with God. He's just trying to cover up his sin. Do you realize what Hamor promises to Jacob? Do you see that? That Hamor promises Jacob land, that you'll be able to trade and buy land, and I'll give our daughters to you, you give your daughters to us. We'll be one people, and you'll have access to the land and to the resources of the land. Isn't that what God has already promised Jacob? As we went through Genesis, isn't that what God has already promised Abraham and now Jacob and his descendants, that the land will be theirs? So what is before Jacob is a decision to take an easy way out or to do it the way God has said to do it, right? The same thing happened to Christ, right? In the wilderness wanderings when he's out there with Satan for 40 days and being tempted. What's the whole situation? What's the gist of what's going on? in the temptation. Satan recognizes that if Christ goes to the cross and the Lamb of God is slain, that he's done, that it's over with, that will crush him, crush death, do away with the judgment that we stand under. He's trying to promise Jesus and trying to give things to Jesus that are already his, that God is giving him anyways, but that he's giving him through the obedience of the cross and through suffering. Satan is trying to give it to him without the cross. And that's the same as true for us today. We want to take the easy way out. We want to do and serve God, but we don't want any cross. We don't want any suffering. We don't want to go the hard way. We want to take the easy way. And this is how Satan gets us many times. He grants us. What's the lie that is involved in pornography specifically? Let's just look at that. And with this many men in this room, there are some of you that are struggling with this right now. What's the lie? Satan whispers in your ear and says to you that you can be fulfilled, you can have pleasure, and you can have it this way, not through and hear me, women, when I say this, not through the difficulty of marriage and the covenant that comes with that and the work. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying I'm trying to show the difference. You recognize this, right? That when we come to a marriage, a man is asking a woman to come and live a life with him. And of course, sexual relationship is going to be part of that. But also part of that is going to be taking out the garbage, moving stuff, and sometimes for in our house, moving things only to move it again, and only to move it, these kinds of things. And Satan whispers in our ear, you can have the pleasure of sex without the hauling out the garbage, without the late night getting up because it's your turn to deal with the crying baby, without this and without... You see, same thing happens to us today. Satan still tries to get us to take the easy way out without following Jesus' example, which is through suffering. We need to recognize that circumcision, the sign of faith that God has given to the people, is being twisted here, right? And it's being used as a tool to lead to death, really. Instead of life and faith, it leads to death because they trick the man. There's too many of them. They know they can't fight them. They trick them into being circumcised like they are. And now they're literally laying in their beds, laying on the ground, wreathing and writhing in pain. They can't defend themselves, and Simeon and Levi, that's exactly where they wanted them. They wait for them to be in the most pain, and then they come and they kill them. They can't defend themselves because they have used this sign of faith as a tool to commit this crime. I want you to see the consequences. We see consequences here in this text, but I want to push you on to Genesis chapter 49 and see the consequences of sin for Levi and Simeon, because we don't really see the consequences for Simeon and Levi here in this text. We see the consequences for Shechem. But in chapter 49 of Genesis, this is where Jacob is dying, and Jacob is handing out blessings to his sons. And we pick up in verse 5, he's talking about Simeon and Levi. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are implements of violence. Let my soul not enter their counsel. Let not my glory be united with their assembly. Because in their anger they slew man, and in their self-will they lamed oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will disperse them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. You see that in the broader story, we recognize that Jacob... He as he talks to Reuben, he scolds Reuben because Reuben was guilty of going up to his bed and sleeping with one of his wives. And then we come to Simeon and Levi, who are next in line, and he is giving them kind of an anti-blessing. It's not really a blessing at all, right? He's telling them that they will not even be a part. Disperse them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel because of this situation, because of the text that we're looking at right now, because of their violence, because of the way they responded. They left no room for God's vengeance. They left no room for God to do what was necessary. They took law into their own hands, if you will, and now we see their consequences in Genesis chapter 49. You go on in that text, and then you see Judah, which is the next in line, is the one that says the scepter, the scepter will never leave his house. And we know that Jesus, the King of Kings, comes through the line of Judah. He is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. I want you to see in this this whirlwind of sin, that there is grace coming. We have to wait till chapter 35 to get to it. We're not going to get to it this morning, but I want to point it out just briefly so that you don't leave here without recognizing that once we get to chapter 35, God is going to be gracious to Jacob and call him back and tell him to go to Bethel. And he's going to open his eyes to the idolatry that is involved, that is present in him and his family's life, and tell him to remove all of those idols. And that's grace. Having his eyes open to the sin that is present in his life, that's grace. And so God's not done with Jacob, and there is grace yet to be had for Jacob. But all we see in this text is sin compounded by sin, compounded by sin. I wonder this morning, are you guilty like Jacob is of being in disobedience and sinning even as you sit here in this worship service? You realize that we read at the beginning that Jacob set up this altar and he was worshiping God. But yet we know that he was supposed to go on to Bethel. The same could be true for us this morning, and I would say likely is true in our lives, that even as we sit under the preached word, we sing songs to praise our King, that some of us, perhaps even many of us, are harboring sin in our life. Now, we may not be sinning right this split second, but we're harboring sin. Some of you men perhaps are struggling with pornography, and you, which is adultery, which is assault on your family, and you got up this morning and put a smile on your face and led your family to come and worship God, as if there's no sin present, as if there's nothing going on in your life. Some of you, perhaps it doesn't have to be women in this regard, but perhaps some of you have gossiped and slandered perhaps someone in this very room this week. You have talked badly about your brother or sister. You have slandered their name. And you come this morning and put a smile on your face and sing songs to the King as if there's no sin in your heart and in your life. My question to you is, do you have any sin in your life that you're harboring, that you have unconfessed, even as we sit here in this worship service? We need to recognize that God's chosen people, those that belong to Him, we still have to confess sin. We still have to contend with sin. God was using Jacob. Jacob was going to continue to be used. God's hand was going to be on Jacob. But he sins. The same is true of us. We are guilty of sin. We're guilty of sin this morning, I have no doubt. But that doesn't mean that God will never use us again. It doesn't mean that God's hand has left us. What it means is that we need to fall afresh in front of Christ, in front of the cross, and confess the sin that is in our life. And we need to ask Him to forgive us and to restore us to a place of usefulness in the kingdom. Do you see the cycle of sin? In James 1, it tells us about the cycle of sin, that each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust is conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Isn't that what happened? Shechem looked out and he saw Dinah. He lusted after Dinah. He saw her. He wanted her. And he acted upon that sin. And that sin led to more sin, which led to more sin. Same is true for us today. We see things that we want, that we desire, that God has not said that we can have, that we're not supposed to be participating in, and we see it and we desire it, and that leads to our actual sinning, and that sin leads to another sin, leads to another sin. When we come to a text like this, I want us, before we leave today, I want us to deal with sin, because how can you look at a text like this whirlwind, as I've called it, of sin, and not deal with sin? Well, part of it is we can feel self-righteous, right? We can think we're not as guilty as Jacob and as Shechem, as Levi and Simeon. We haven't committed murder recently. We haven't kidnapped anyone. We haven't stolen anyone's possessions or taken anybody's children and made them live with us. We haven't done these things, and so somehow we feel like we're good. We're all right. We don't fit into this. We would confess that we're sinners, but we're not sinners like that. We're not sinners like that. We need to contend with how the world views sin. You see, my assumption is that that the default position in our minds and in our hearts today is one of balancing the scale. We believe, and people will say this, that if your good outweighs the bad, then you get to go to heaven. If your bad outweighs the good, then you don't get to go to heaven. Brothers and sisters, that's not what Scripture says. That's not the gospel, and it will not work. It will not work. What that mentality will lead you into a life of fear and no joy, because where is your scale right now? Can you tell me where are you balanced, or do you need to do 3 more acts of kindness today to push the scale a little bit in your favor? Or is it perhaps more? Where is your scale? It will lead to fear. Listen to some of the ways that we deal with sin today. We call it, if we talk about it at all, we call it mistakes. We call sin anything that robs me of my self-esteem. Did you know that there's internet chat rooms that are like confession rooms that you can go to and hear people confess their sin? And one young girl was bragging about how she enjoys to go and look in these chat rooms because she recognizes she's not the only one sinning. Just like I said, we don't need to come to this text and go away and think that we somehow be commended in our self-righteousness. That's not what should happen. Robert Schuller was asked before he died. You remember who Robert Schuller is? Used to be pastor of the Crystal Cathedral in California. He was asked about this text in 2 Timothy chapter 3, what his interpretation of this text was, and his reply was, I hope you don't preach that. I hope you don't preach that. If you preach that, you will hurt a lot of beautiful people. I hope by now that you have figured out that Pastor Phil and Pastor Christian and I don't believe that it is our job to caress you or to pat you on the back and tell you how wonderful you are. Our job, as we see it, is to put the Word of God before you. And not just before you, but before ourselves as well. And so we're not going to avoid texts like 2 Timothy chapter 3 that says, "But realize this, that in the last days difficult times will come, for men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious, gossips, without self-control, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness, although they denied its power." Basically what it's saying is that in the last days, it's pretty much going to look like Jacob's days, right? People are going to be lovers of self. They're going to be only concerned about themselves, not a concern with what God is doing in their lives. And they are going to be haters. They're going to be revilers. They're going to be murderers, rapers. Go on down the list. So basically what it's telling us is that things haven't really changed as much as we say they have. We are still sinful before a holy and righteous God. I'm running out of time, but let me just go along this line with sin. We need to recognize that this world's view of sin that I've hinted at, where Joel Osteen will say he doesn't even deal with sin because he wants to encourage people. That's not what he's about. He doesn't want to deal with sin. The Bible says in Isaiah 64 that our righteousness, our goodness, our best is as filthy rags. Jesus calls the Pharisees whitewashed tombs full of dead man's bones. And in Romans 3, I don't have time to read this whole text, but Romans chapter 3, this goes on about our sin. We recognize Romans chapter 3, verse 23, right? We tell our VBSers it. We tell our J12ers it. We talk about, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, right? We know this verse. But my question to you this morning is, do we believe it? Do we believe that we are sinners? Do we believe that we are the same as Shechem and Levi and Simeon in this text, that the only reason we are not murderers and rapers, that we are not as bad as they are, is because of God's gracious restraining hand in our life? What do we believe about sin this morning? What do we believe about being right before God? See, I'm going to give an invitation. In just a minute, I'm going to read 2 verses, and then I'm going to give an invitation. Well, let me just read the verses first. Philippians 2 says, "To work out our salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who is at work in you, both to will and to work for His good pleasure." Ephesians 2, 8 and following. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are the workmanship created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand so that we would walk in them. Listen to me this morning. The distinction I want to implant into your minds this morning is one between personal righteousness and positional righteousness. Listen to me. Sam Owens has no personal righteousness that I can claim that is mine. My best is filthy rags. I've already read you that verse. I am just as guilty as Jacob. I'm just as guilty as Shechem. I'm just as guilty as Levi and Simeon. I have no personal righteousness that I can bring to the table that is mine. But that's not all that's true about Sam Owens, because I have trusted in the finished work of Jesus Christ. According to Scripture, I am positionally righteous. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm perfect right now. All you need to do, if you're confused about that, you need to just come spend a day with me, and you'll recognize that I'm not perfect. You'll recognize that I get frustrated with the girls when I'm yelling and yelling to do something, and it's like, is anybody listening to the words coming out of my mouth? I sometimes am short with Susan. You probably don't believe that, but I sometimes am short with Susan. Sometimes I get frustrated. Sometimes I get frustrated with Pastor Christian. You know, Pastor Christian, as the student pastor, you know, he thinks he has to be on the cutting edge and trendy, and so he got for a while. He doesn't know where it is, and so if you know where it is, please do not return it to him. But he had for a while a bullhorn, and he would come out in the office, and you know, I'm sitting back in my office trying to study and trying to prepare for the next message or whatever, and Pastor Christian's out in the hall. Who's got the telephone number for Pizza Hut? Or something like this, you know, and on his bullhorn, and his bullhorn has went missing. I wish I could say that I'm guilty. I did look for it, but I could not find it. You see, sometimes I get frustrated with Pastor Christian. He probably gets frustrated with me. My point is, I am not perfect. And if you come and spend a day with me, you will recognize I have no personal righteousness to bring to the table. I am not going to heaven because of anything that I have done. I believe I am going to heaven. I believe I am forgiven. I believe that I stand righteous before God, not because of what I've done, but because of the finished work of Christ, because of what He has done on the cross, because He has saved me, and now I am one. I'm unified with Christ. I'm one with Him. And so what is true of Christ is true of me. And so when God looks at me, He sees righteousness. But He's not my righteousness. He sees Christ's righteousness. And so positionally, I stand righteous before you this morning. Not because I'm perfect, not because I have anything, but because Christ has saved me. And so listen to my invitation this morning and take it seriously to believers and to unbelievers. Let's start with unbelievers. Let's think of it, conversion and sanctification. Unbelievers, if you are here this morning and you have no doubt in your mind that you have not bowed your heart to Jesus Christ, you've heard the story perhaps, but you have not recognized, you have not called out to Jesus and said, Jesus, I trust what you did at the cross is sufficient for my sin. If you have not called out to Him and said, Lord, forgive me for my sin, save me, be my master and Lord, come into my heart, be my master and Lord, control me. If you have not bowed your heart to Jesus Christ, you need to be concerned about conversion this morning, salvation. And you need to come, and all I'm asking you to do is come and confess your sin, not to me, but to Jesus. Confess your sin to Jesus and trust in His grace. Trust in the finished work of Jesus on the cross. Now listen, if you're a believer here this morning, you are not perfect. You are not righteous. You are still a sinner. According to multiple texts I've read, you are still a sinner. Your best is filthiness before God. You have bowed your heart. You do trust. You do believe that Jesus' work is sufficient for salvation. But some of us get confused when it comes to sanctification, when it comes to the continuing growth in our Christian life, and we start trying to add works to the finished work of Christ on the cross. And hear me, believers, this morning. I am calling for you also to come and confess your sin that you are involved in right now, that is true of you, before Christ, and not get saved all over again, but to trust in the same spilled blood, the same finished work of Christ on the cross for your sanctification, just as much as you trusted in Him for your conversion or your salvation. See, brothers and sisters, we can't walk away from the cross. It is only by God's grace that we know Him and that we are saved, and it is only by God's grace that we will grow in our walk and that we will hate sin and we will love God and we will walk away. So hear me, I am not calling you to try harder this morning. That's not what I'm calling you to. We do need to obey. We do need to do things. But the Philippians verse I read you, remember, even as Paul told the Philippians to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, what did he say? It is God who wills and works it in you. So I'm not calling you to try harder, believers. I'm calling you to continue to trust in the finished work of Christ for your sanctification as well as your salvation. See, we come to a text like this, full of sin, and at least for me this week as I was studying it, and I hope for you, it reminds me that I am right there with them. I am sinful to the core. I have no personal righteousness, and I have to fall on my face every single morning when I wake up and say, Jesus, it's about you. It's through you. It's through your blood. If I'm going to do anything useful today, if I'm going to hate sin and love you, if I'm going to turn away from the desires of my heart, it's going to be your grace working in me. So I hope that this text points you to Christ and points you to your need for Christ. Let's pray.